This is Caltech 4, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Our defense fleet was destroyed in an ambush by an unknown force. To any ship in the range, we request an immediate assistance with the evacuation efforts. Silence. Again. Tazaz was getting desperate. Down there, the lives of 1 million colonists were at stake. It was his duty to protect them to his last scale, but his destroyer could do only so much. The Fang has avoided the massacre of the main fleet by sheer luck. Breakdown of her engine simply meant she didn't sail out in time. But now, it was the only armed thing between the attacker and the civilian ships taking on as many refugees as they could. Tazaz looked at the screen, seeing the busy activity on the surface. Those captains knew it too. When the attackers return, nothing will stop them from pillaging and killing all of the colonists. The best Tazaz could hope for was to delay them a little. "Commander, repeat the broadcast again," he ordered, in their hissy reptilian language. "Lieutenant, bring us to the closer orbit. We need to keep ourselves as close to the civilian ships as possible." "Aye, Captain," replied officers at once. "Captain, FTL rift detected," alarmed him one of the ensigns. "Red alert! Prepare for combat!" shouted Tazaz the order. He tensed in the captain's chair. "They are here sooner than I expected," he thought to himself. The Fang engines bursted to life as the ship moved to position. Main guns were armed and ready. Torpedoes and missile silos opened for initial salvo. "Maybe we can get 2 or 3 before we go down. Perhaps we could self-destruct our FTL core." If he were to go down, he wanted to take as many of them as possible. The rift suddenly got bigger and brighter. A grey hull started to sail through it, a massive colossus of a ship. Tazaz observed it with awe. This ship was angular, with heavy dorsal armor, as if adorned in hexagonal plate armor. It counted no less than 6 triple-barreled main battery guns, 2 on the ventral side, 4 on the dorsal, both sets in super-firing positions. Each turret was twice as large as his own ship. He spotted rows of missile silos on each side. Their hatches were quickly opening and revealing the warheads. "Detecting fission material in those warheads," an officer confirmed his suspicion. Besides the nuclear missiles and main battery guns, there were dozens of secondary dual-purpose twin-barrel batteries scattered all over the ship, giving it a 360 degrees firing arc. And to top it all off, AAA and CIW's weaponry, including interceptor missiles, were scanning the area at full alert. On armored prow, proudly emblazoned were the words HMS Dreadnought. Humans, Tazaz thought, as if the kinetic nature of the ship's weaponry did not reveal it enough. Tazaz's species and humans had a difficult history, to say the least. Being the closest interstellar neighbor, they ought to be tension with the human coalition, and all of their tiny nations. He wouldn't describe them as enemies, more like rivals. Both species competing for the same area of space with the same resources. They never entered a direct conflict, but that didn't mean there were no strong words or even acts of sabotage from both sides. Like the mysterious computer virus of unknown origin that crippled most of their non-critical software a few years ago. Or that one time a human ship ran out of fuel and had to wait for 2 years before getting permission to dock. The crew was almost starved to death by that point. There was this bitter rivalry between them. If you asked humans who would be most likely to invade them, it would be the Tazaz's people, and vice versa. "They are here to enjoy the show," wondered Tazaz darkly. That would be so typical. sending their strongest ship, and then just let it watch as the attackers destroy all of their forces. Perhaps they were hoping to claim the planet for themselves after... Captain, we are being hailed. Tazaz was taken out of his train of thought, and ordered for the transmission to be opened on the main screen. Captain Sherwood of the British warship HMS Dreadnought, we have arrived as soon as we could. How can we be of assistance? The human captain said, in the stereotypical British accent. This is Captain Tazaz of the Fang. Our colony faces imminent attack by an unknown enemy force. We request your assistance in the evacuation of civilians to safety while holding back enemy assault. Our sensors are already picking up FTL rifts at the polar orbit. Tazaz was expecting some bargaining. He expected to be ridiculed or laughed at by the human captain. But instead, the Hellas 8 did none of that. Understood. Dreadnought will move into position to intercept, sending fighters to cover the evacuation fleet. If I may, I would ask you to stay back with the civilian ships and engage any enemy that could get past us. This was a sound idea. Roger. Are your reinforcements on the way? Unfortunately, no. The closest fleet is 3 solar days away. We are the only ones in range. Understood. The human captain nodded. The man noticed the baffled expression on the bridge of Tazaz's ship, and wanted to act on it. Sir, we may not be allies, but both of our nations value the lives of the civilians above all. We will save as many of them as we can, together. Dreadnought out. Dreadnought lit its thrusters. For the ship of its size, it was impressively nimble. Hangar doors at the bottom of the ship opened, sending hundreds of unmanned and manned fighters in swarms to cover the fleeing ships. Dreadnought itself turned broadside towards all the FTL rifts, aiming its guns and getting ready for the onslaught. It was just as the first refugee ship started to rise up from the surface that the enemy ship revealed themselves. More organic and black than anything he knew, they resembled some kinds of insect. Sensors could not discern any weapon mounts, yet they immediately started blasting with their energy weapons. The communication officer was intercepting the short-range radio chatter from onboard the Dreadnought. His crew was still using radios to communicate between different parts of the ship, and played it over the intercom. Target the largest enemy vessel. Secondary guns load the cluster munitions. Tactical nukes and missiles on standby. Dreadnought, open fire. Tazaz observed it on the bridge, their cameras giving them live feed of the actions. Dozens of attacking vessels started barreling down towards Dreadnought, only to be met by a bullet hell. Main guns open fire! The main battery shot the ship so loudly it could be heard through the radio. Each salvo blindingly bright before impacting enemy vessels, pulverizing them in a single shot. Enemy hit! Hostile fighters, course 029 bearing 150, range 12 miles. Enemy fighter crafts peeled off from their carriers, trying to get to the transports. Squadron Delta, intercepting. Human fighter jets engaged them in a frantic dogfight. The maneuvers the human fighters performed were staggering. He would expect something like that from a machine, not a biological life form. Several carriers appeared from the rifts, launching bombers and sending a barrage of rockets at Dreadnought. Activate the flag fields! He heard an order being shouted. Tazaz never before saw a flag field, but when he did, he was quite impressed. The whole of the Dreadnought's starboard side erupted in fire, small clouds of explosion denying any chances of the incoming ammunition to hit. Volleys of missiles entered the field. They were ripped apart by flak and seawiz. Bombers saw that and attempted to flank the ship from underneath. This was met with partial success, as almost all of its AAA guns were focused on the missiles. They launched the payload straight into an engine cluster. However, Dreadnought was so heavily armoured that it seemed to do no damage. As a reaction, Dreadnought engaged its thrusters and lurched itself forward, all guns blazing. Lines of rounds painted the empty void with their orange glow, leaving behind small clouds of sparkling particles from their propellant charges. Dreadnought maneuvered carefully, making sure that the most armored part of the ship always faced the enemy. Tazaz immediately recognized from their course that they were getting themselves into position to launch their nukes as close as possible to make their interception impossible. "Activate flash protocols! All hands, brace for nuclear strike on enemy vessels!" shouted Tazaz on the bridge. All windows automatically dimmed to pitch black. Only monitor screens remained. Dreadnought shook under incoming fire, the ion beams heating and melting parts of its thickly armored skin. But then, she launched its payload. "Nukes away! 10 seconds to impact." Single line over the radio. For a moment, he could glimpse panic in the enemy formation as they realized what was about to strike them. But it was too late. Dozens of tactical warheads detonated on them, vaporizing many ships in their blast or severely damaging them. Subspace shockwaves of their detonating FTL cores were enough to cause actual structural damage to the Fang. Blasted debris launched itself like giant shrapnel. "Evasive maneuvers! Shoot the debris that goes towards the refugees!" "Aye, aye, sir!" Fang weaved its way through the debris and opened fire with its plasma guns, managing to deviate or melt most of the debris away. There was a moment of respite as the enemy vessels pulled back and regrouped. "Commander, status report," he ordered. "Dreadnought sustained damage, unknown severity. There are more rifts opening. Detecting incoming crafts behind us. Corvettes. They almost reached the convoy. Engage them at will." It was Fang's time to shine. The little ship that could. Green plasma beams pierced the black void of space, hitting the enemy vessels with the power of a battleship. With precise shooting, it made quick work of the enemy ship. However, they were hit in return by an ion beam. The ship shook and creaked as one of the main guns was torn away from the hull. Onboard electronics went haywire as the charged ion particles decimated sensitive hardware. "Main computer unresponsive. Switching to manual backup. Hull breach! Hull breach! Isolate the area, now!" commanded Tazaz. "Fires on deck 7! Send the damage control teams to the affected locations." While Fang had its own problem, Dreadnought was still fighting. More and more ships appeared. Dreadnought visibly slowed down, one of its engines on fire. Pristine hull smeared with black blast or crumpled by impacts. Battered but unbeaten, they continued fighting. Its main guns unleashing metallic fury at a faster pace than before. The ship lashed out with lead, ripping and tearing enemies apart. Even Seawards was being used as an oversized buzzsaw. Streams of tracer rounds so dense it looked like she was firing away with beam weapons. The enemy hull stood no chance. A graveyard of ships and debris started to mount around Dreadnought. The aliens fired relentlessly with their ion weapons. Dreadnought was taking more and more damage. Like a true brawler, it returned the favor in kind. But it could not last forever. "Sir, incoming communication from Dreadnought. On screen!" A view on the bridge of that beast painted a bruised image. There were wires hanging out from the ceiling, small fires being put down, alongside some rock-like debris on the floor. "This is Dreadnought, requesting an update on the refugees," asked the captain. Tazaz ignored the streak of blood across his forehead and replied, "Only 3 ships left, sir. Then we can cover your retreat." The human captain grinned. "I'm afraid we won't be back home for tier medals. They struck our FTL core. It's irreparably damaged." Thinking quickly on his feet, Tazaz offered, We can send to you our own spare parts. I can have my engineers working on it immediately. The captain shook his head. Too risky for your crew. They wouldn't make it over to us. Besides, this is a new experimental core. I doubt there are any parts compatible between our ships. Tazaz silently nodded in acknowledgement. We will fight on as long as we can. May I request to take aboard your fleet, our fighter crafts and shuttles? Yes, sir, but our capacity is limited. We may not have room for everyone, informed Tazaz. I am aware of the possibility. We will move Dreadnought to cover our small crafts and escape pods. I will try to evacuate as many of my crew as possible. Dreadnought out. The screen went to black. Outside cameras picked the image of the outside. You heard the human. Prepare medbays for incoming wounded. Call out to that refugee fleet. Tell them to do final preparations for FTL. And take any human ships that lands on them aboard. The commander nodded and started messaging the fleet. Tazaz observed on the screen as the Dreadnought turned his massive bulk to expose as much hull as possible to cover the flying crafts. Guns were blazing, repeatedly detonating the black alien vessels in a spray of machine gore. Another ion beam, this time hitting one of the main guns, detonating its ammo and ripping parts of the Dreadnought's superstructure in a massive explosion. Tazaz watched in shock. This would be a killing blow on a normal human ship, but not for Dreadnought. Listing, black smoke and embers jetting out from his wound, she just clenched his teeth and roared with his guns in anger. She fought on, even as she started to fall apart. She valiantly defended her escaping crew, but many shuttles still got hit. Bodies could be seen floating in vacuum. Tazaz decided to act. Helm! Bring Fang as close to the Dreadnought as possible. But sir, that would put us in direct line of fire of enemy cattle ships. I am aware. That's an order. Aye, sir. Flank speed ahead. The Fang raced towards the wounded battleship. On its way, fighting with other smaller ships and fighters. Streams of plasma struck an enemy destroyer, cutting it in half before its FTL core detonated. The shockwave propelled Fang even faster, shook his hull. Lights flickered and turned off. They just lost auxiliary power. Restore the power immediately, ordered Tazaz. Sir, one of the capital ships has a look at us. Before Tazaz could react, missiles were already on their way. He stared at the radar screen, observing the incoming doom. But just in the nick of time, Dreadnought came barreling down with a sea whiz and blasted all the missiles to hell. One exploded so closely that he could hear its broken parts impacting the hull. Incoming transmission! Sound only! Play it! Captain! Shouted the human captain on him. What the hell are you doing, you bloody mongron? You were supposed to stay with the evacuation fleet. Evacuation fleet is at a safe distance and almost ready to depart. I am here to save as many of you as possible. It was a laugh. What was he hearing? But it was not the mean-spirited kind he was used to. This sounded like a genuine laugh of camaraderie. Your help is appreciated. Stand by for docking hooks. Docking hooks? Wondered Tazaz aloud, before finding out. Ding! Bing! Metallic sounds echoed throughout the ship. Sir, we have been hit by something, informed his clueless ensign. We are being firmly held by the Dreadnought. That was the moment Tazaz realized. Open the outside hatches! All of them! And it was just in time, as humans in emergency EVA suits started to flood the airlocks, jumping from one ship to the other. Interesting. Their wounded go first, followed by the youngest, thought Tazaz, as his crew helped the humans to get inside. Meanwhile, Tazaz could feel the fury of the Dreadnought. Being so close to it, the hull vibrated with the weapons fire. Each hit taken by it shook the destroyer immensely. Pieces of debris struck something on the communication array, as all outside communications went dark. "Restore the comms!" ordered Tazaz, sending repair teams. "Sir, one of the rescued humans demands to see you," informed the chief medical officers over the intercom. Tazaz hesitated, but then allowed it. "Bring him in." Soon after, a woman in what he imagines used to be a bright white uniform, adorned with blue and gold, entered. Now, it was splattered with blood and soot. "I am Tazaz, captain of the Fang, and you are?" "First Officer Miranda Carter. I have an urgent matter to tell you, sir." Tazaz nodded and assigned to continue. "Sir, we identified the enemy flagship. Captain intends to ram it and detonate the FTL core. You have exactly 2 minutes to get out." Tazaz's eyes opened wide, but his training did not make him hesitate for a second. "Thrusters to maximum! Close the hatches! Get us out of here!" "Sir, what about the humans?" Tazaz glanced at the human officer on his bridge. She had a grim expression, but did a small nod of acknowledgement. She understood the situation just as he did. "There is nothing we can do for them. Otherwise we will lose all of the ones we have saved," he said plainly. It was such a weird feeling. Just yesterday, he would not bash an eye over a lost human. Heck, even thousands of them. But now, it felt like leaving behind his own men. His officers followed orders to the letter after that. It was not physically difficult to get free out of the Dreadnought's clamps, but it felt like an agonizing eternity. With the message of Dreadnought's intention, civilian ships started to escape into FTL. They took as many human ships as possible, but many were left behind. It was still too early to count the survivors, however. His own ship was full to the brim, life support barely keeping up. As the last of the refugee ships jumped away, the Fang remained alone with the Dreadnought. Ion beams started to glance at the hull, as the enemy had nothing better to shoot at now. Comms were damaged, but they still received a simple text message from the Dreadnought. "Remember our sacrifice. Carry on without us. Dreadnought out." The massive ship, now reduced to a smouldering wreck, still blazing away with the single remaining gun, picked up speed and flew through the battlefield. Some smaller enemy ships were unfortunate enough to be caught by its ramming blow. They exploded into a massive firework display before Dreadnought reached its destination. It rammed one of the enemy capital ships with enormous force, cutting nearly halfway through it. Then, exactly 10 seconds later, a blinding flash of the detonated FTL core created a singularity, pulling everything around with the force of an artificial black hole. "Jump, now!" shouted Tazaz, before the shockwave could catch them. At the last second, battered Fang opened an FTL rift and jumped away. And that was the end of the Dreadnought. Later, it was discovered that out of the 5,000 crewmen, 3,231 survived, mostly thanks to Tazaz's brave maneuver. Tazaz became the first alien to be decorated by a human government, earning something called the George Cross. Captain Sherwood was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, and had a battleship named in his honour. Their brave defence of Caltech 4 led to the forging of the Human-Itarsi Alliance, which later managed to liberate the planet and push the invaders out. Tazaz himself became the first admiral of the Alliance, and served aboard HMS Dreadnought II, before retiring 50 years later. To this day, he remains the most decorated Alliance officer, and is considered a key figure in bringing permanent peace between both species.